This is Minter Field outside Shafter, California, a small airport where every year, on the last weekend of April, a very special gathering takes place. It's a gathering of warbirds, a ghost squadron from the past of the great aircraft of World War II, dozens of them flying in for the weekend to allow people to experience history alive. I'm Mark Howell from KUZZ Radio in Bakersfield, California. It's been my privilege to be associated with the air show for 12 years now. Let's take you on a tour of some of the aircraft and give you a look at some of the show that is Warbirds in Action 1993. The California air show season is ready to begin again. Most of the time, Minter Field is a sleepy little airport north of Bakersfield, but it's a place with a history, and that's why the Warbirds are celebrated here. By Saturday morning, the Ghost Squadron has assembled. The crew is ready on the ground, and all that's needed is an audience. That's no problem here. This show has been going on for years. People know what to expect. They expect flying, and they're going to get it. Throughout the day, dozens of sparkling warbirds take to the air, giving the crowd not just the sights, but the sounds and the smells, and even for a fortunate few, the feel of history. Let's go flying with Ron Hevley, one of Bakersfield's ace aerobatic pilots in his North American SNJ. We're speaking with Ron Hevley, one of the local aerobatic performers and the owner of the T6 here. Ron, you're an aerobatic pilot that people come out here to see and really enjoy your performances. How did you get into that?
Well, really as a kid, when I started flying, the instructor that I had a little Ryan PT-22, and I just wanted to fly that really bad, and he wouldn't let me fly it unless he gave me some acrobatic instruction, because he thought I'd probably go out and try to do it on my own. And that started me off, and I liked doing it, and I've been doing acrobatics ever since. I think I was 16 years old at the time.
When he thought you were going to go out and do it on your own, was he right?
Probably, yeah. He just wanted to make sure I would do it right and be able to keep myself out of trouble. So, and basically been doing the acrobatics ever since.
Now, an AT-6 is not a plane I would think of as an aerobatic airplane.
Well, it's not an acrobatic airplane like a Pitts or something like that, but it's a good airplane. It was a fighter trainer, and so they had to do all the maneuvers that basically I do in a show to be a fighter pilot. And the only difference is I'm doing them next to the ground and in close, and so it's the same maneuvers. And so the airplane is very capable of doing doing those fighter type maneuvers.
Is it fairly heavy on the controls or not?
A little back pressure when you're going fast but it's a fairly light on the controls. A very nice flying airplane.
Now you're also in the crop dusting business, right?
That's correct.
Is there some connection between the kind of flying you have to do in crop dusting and the kind of flying you do here?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit. Crop dusting, there is some seat of the pants type flying you have to do, and the same thing carries over in flying this type of airplane.
Now this airplane that you have is probably one of the prettiest T6s out here on the field. Did you do the restoration on this, or how did you happen to come by it?
No, my oldest son did. We've owned the airplane for a lot of years, and it was getting pretty ratty, so my oldest son had just gotten out of college and had his A&P license and wanted to rebuild it. It took him about 3 years part-time, and he took it all apart and put it back together. And did everything. He did the paint job. He did everything really on the whole airplane.
It's a beautiful job. He's to be congratulated for it.
Yeah, I thought he did pretty good. The price was right too. All I had to do is check him out in the airplane, and so he can fly it. The problem is I lost my airplane. I got to ask him now when I get to fly it. See.
The SNJ, or AT-6 as it was called by the Army Air Corps, is one of the most famous training aircraft of World War II. Today they are air racers, and in a Minterfield first, this show featured an air racing demonstration. The AT-6s flew a course like the one at Reno, except that this was just a demonstration. Minterfield is too close to populated areas for a genuine race. The Federal Aviation Administration was on hand to make sure everything went safely and smoothly. Not many of the people who come to the Minterfield Air Show ever get to see an air race, but this was so close to the real thing that it was pretty hard to tell the difference. The AT-6 air racers put on a show that had everybody's eyes to the sky. It may have been a simulation, but it was a crowd pleaser. The winner and still champion, Bakersfield's own Eddie Van Fossen. Many of the spectators come to see the rarities attracted by this show. This year brought out some of the most unusual military aircraft to be seen anywhere. Making its debut at the show, Bill Tiger DeStefani's newest restoration, the magnificent P-47 Thunderbolt.
Well, this airplane, of course, was built by the U.S. government back during World War II. This particular airplane was built in 1945. It never really saw any action. The war ended prior to it being able to get into action. At any rate, after the war, it was provided to the Yugoslavian Air Force, and it flew with them for a while. And then when they discarded them, they it kind of went derelict there. I'm not really sure of how, but somehow this aircraft ended up in a swampy area, and it was located by a museum in Yugoslavia. They already had a flying P-47, and they recovered it out of the swamp and had it behind their museum. And one of the owners of this, there's myself and two other fellas, at that time was involved with the Reagan administration and was doing some work for the U.S. government in Yugoslavia. This is about 4 years ago, of course, before they got into all the problems they have now. At any rate, he found out that they did have this P-47 and they would like to have gotten rid of it. They were going to scrap it out. It was in such bad shape. He talked him into not scrapping it and purchased the aircraft and then brought it back to the United States. And then myself and David Price got involved in it, and we brought it here to Minter Field, and over the last couple of years have now restored it back to flying condition.
Let's talk a little bit about the airplane itself for people who are not familiar with the P-47 and what it was and what it did and was used for.
Well, the P-47, of course, was a World War II fighter airplane. It also was used in the escort role in the European theater. The problem it had in the earlier stages of the war, when this aircraft was available, it just didn't haul enough fuel, therefore it could not go all the way to Germany and return back to England. So consequently the bombers would be making a raid, and the P-47s would have to turn and go back, and of course the Germans knew that, and once the P-47s left the bomber squadrons, then they would attack, and it left the bombers kind of alone. And of course all of that stopped once the advent of the P-51 Mustang came along. It had long-range capability. When the Germans saw that, they knew that it was the beginning of the end.
Another exciting arrival at the show was the C-46 Curtiss Commando, a rare survivor flown in by the Confederate Air Force. Originally developed as an airliner, the C-46 gained fame as she flew supplies into China over the Himalayas.
We're speaking with Ellis Meeker. Ellis, welcome to Minter Field.
Well, it's fun to be here.
First question I got to ask you, where'd you fly in from?
Camarillo, California, down near Oxnard. That's where we base.
Very good. And of course you flew in Commando, the Curtiss C-46.
Yes, sir. The largest twin-engine airplane in World War II.
You're the pilot. Are you the owner also?
No, this is owned by the Confederate Air Force. And in effect, it's on lease to us at Camarillo. We have to send them $700 for every hour we fly it. Therefore, we're open for donations. The aircraft, of course, as I mentioned, biggest twin in World War II. It cruises at 200 miles an hour and burns 175 gallons of gas every hour. They could haul 50 troops with all their equipment, or up to 14,000 pounds of cargo. And put 4 Jeeps aboard it. In Vietnam, they brought them back into service. They were operated by civilians. They put 99 Vietnamese on these aircraft. Moved whole villages. Its most famous work, and why we call it China Doll, is these airplanes supported the Chinese Army for 2 years, flying from India over the world's highest mountains, the Himalayas, in some of the world's worst weather, into China to support a 700,000-man army. And that was what was known as flying the hump. Some of the worst work the Army Air Corps ever had to do. Over 750 of these aircraft were lost in that 2 years just due to weather. It was quite an operation. And there's still a Hump Pilots Association to keep the memories alive. I flew these in Nam. That's where I got most of my time. I'm working for Air America. And we did not support the military. We were used to supply the villages with everything they needed. We flew so much rice, we had rats living aboard. That's the truth.
A question on the numbering system, the C-47 and the C-46. C-47s are well known, so is the C-46. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, the numbering system as to which dates it entered the Air Corps numeral system has been a mystery to everybody, because the C-47 was built and flying with the airlines 5 years before this flew. That is, as the DC-3. So the C-46 came along. It was intended to be a civilian transport, but because it had the new Pratt & Whitneys with 2-stage superchargers, the Air Force saw, or the Air Corps saw that airplane and what it could do on the hump, and they grabbed the whole production line, and that's where most of them went, right over there. They didn't see much service in Europe. They saw some service in Africa, but mainly on the hump. And so it's unexplainable how the Air Force ever got those two. But whoa, we are really twice the size of a 47. They can carry 6,500 pounds. We carry 14,000. They could only carry 18 troops with all their equipment. We could carry 50. We fly 40 knots faster than they do and can climb probably 8,000 feet higher.
And there's a rare bird for sure. One of 4 flying in the world today, the Hawker Hurricane.
Alan, you're the pilot of this Hawker Hurricane, is that right?
Right. The Hurricane belongs to David Price down at the Museum of Flying, and I flew it up yesterday. We actually had a little glitch and made a landing over at the municipal airport, but sorted that out this morning and then brought it in here for the show, and it'll be here tomorrow.
Now, I understand that this airplane is really a very rare bird.
My understanding is there are only 3 of them in the world that fly. This is the only one in North America. There was another one, but unfortunately was lost in that fire that the Canadian Warplane Heritage suffered.
Tell me a little bit about the history of these planes.
Well, you know, it's sort of the unsung hero of the Battle of Britain. The more glamorous sister, of course, is the Spitfire. Everybody recognizes the profile and the semi-elliptical wing, and that's really what we think of. But during the Battle of Britain, this really did the yeoman's job.
Explain how it helped.
Well, it just shot down more airplanes than the Spitfire. You know, it evolved. It's old technology. It evolved from the Hawker Fury biplane. You can still see a lot of the biplane in it if you look after the airplane. The fuselage construction that's involved back there came directly from the Fury biplane, and then the front part of the airplane is very modern, with retractable gear and monoplane, and of course the Rolls-Royce Merlin.
Now, the Merlin, of course, the same engine as in the P-51?
Well, it's essentially the same engine. It's the one in the P-51 is several series removed in terms of what the engine actually is. This is somewhat of a lesser horsepower engine and an earlier engine.
How does this airplane perform?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a great aerobatic platform. It's very gentle. It's got wide landing gear, unlike the Spitfire. Has air brakes, of course, which take a little bit of getting used to. They're a little different, but they work fine. Has very straightforward landing and takeoff characteristics, and it's a nice airplane.
Where did this particular airplane come from?
From the Charles Church collection in Europe.
So it was pretty well intact when you found it?
It was actually fully restored by Charles Church, and of course he was lost in an airplane accident, and so David purchased it from that collection.
What's it like to fly? Is it fun?
Oh, it's a wonderful privilege to even be around these airplanes, and then to have the opportunity to actually get in and fly it is wonderful. It's good.
Okay. And those of you folks who want to see Dennis fly again in Tracy, the 16th...
Later, Hawker produced another legendary aircraft, the Sea Fury. Dennis Sanders shows the crowd what she can do.
Flying. This is the two-place version, the trainer version, and it's number 924. Many of you times you've seen it race in the heat races up there. And Dennis's brother Brian and him share the chores between 1 year. One brother flies the Dreadnought number 8, and while the other one flies 924, and they switch alternately from year to year. So this year coming up is Dennis's turn to get in the family racer number 8 Dreadnought. All right, now you see that trail of smoke as he goes. Looks like it was drawn with a laser. Nice, big, easy, lazy roll, but right on perfection. And as the speed drops off to about 100 knots, back comes the stick, very lazy, over the top. And again, we see that very beautiful elliptical shape of the wing. Coming down the backside, smoke still on. Look at that smoke pattern up there where it had to break off and on. Now, as you'll look up at the top, where he came across the top, you'll see how as he got slower, that smoke pattern changes. Now he'll come way back on the power, and he's going to go out here and make a big 270 degree circle. And as he comes back in, he's going to slow the airplane down. Now, what causes wake turbulence is the heavier the airplane and the bigger the airplane, the more wake turbulence that you will find. Now, as he slows the airplane down, creating a lot of different air going over the top of the wing, you will see the radical wind directional change as you look back, way in back of the airplane. Right about here in front of us. Take a look at that. That's what the air is doing. That is why, as a student pilot, you're told not to get in back of an airplane that's taking off or just landing, especially the big one, because that is what it's going to do to you if you get in back of one. And believe me, there's nothing that a pilot can do once you get caught into that. You have to ride it out, and your ride out, you just hope that you don't hit the ground doing it. Now, Dennis is going to go out, make another big circle, come back, and those, particularly for those of you folks with cameras, get them ready because you're going to come by for the photo pass. Now this make a good, if you got a camcorder, still camera, whatever, get a big shot, and let's all wave to Dennis Sanders out there as he goes by. Let's give him a big wave. Ah, wasn't that beautiful?
With the Museum of Flying out of Santa Monica, the people who brought us these marvelous warbirds, including that Hawker Hurricane, is John Gilbert. And John works with the museum. And while we have some time here and we can still hear ourselves, John, tell us a little bit about the Spitfires.
Thank you, Jim. The Spitfires we have this afternoon are a Mark 9 and a Mark 14. The Mark 9 was built around about 42, 43 and served with the Royal Air Force.
And the Mark 9 is the one with the Royal Air Force markings, right? Is that correct?
Actually, Jim, they both have Royal Air Force markings.
Okay.
The Mark 9 has the conventional markings, the red, white, and blue, and the Mark 14 has the Southeast Asia markings, where they took the red out of the center to avoid to avoid confusion with the Japanese.
Now, talk a little bit about, if you will, what kinds of power plants we have in these two planes. They have Rolls-Royce engines, I understand, but two different engines, right?
The Mark 9 has the Merlin engine. It's got a Series 60 Merlin, which has a 2-speed, 2-stage supercharger. And the Mark 14 has a Rolls-Royce Griffon.
All right, let's talk about the Mark 14. It's got the V12 Rolls-Royce Griffon engine in it. This plane, I understand, served with the RAF. It was built in '45, and then it didn't stop there, right?
No, it went to the Southeast Asia area, and then it was passed on to the Indian Air Force and served with them for a few years.
And 1978, it was recovered from India,
yes,
right?
It was recovered from India by the Orden Bailey brothers, taken to England, and then the restoration was performed in England by the Wickenden brothers.
And purchased by David Price, who is the owner of the museum, right? The Museum of Flying?
David is the president of the museum, correct.
President of the museum. All right, got a couple of P-51s ready to launch here. Left to stage center. And as we're watching the P-51s launch, can you compare the flight characteristics of the Spitfire to the P-51 Mustang?
Well, the Spitfire went through a lot of different versions in its life, 24 different models. The early airplanes had a top speed of around about 360 miles an hour, and the later ones went up to around about 450. To compare that with the 51, the 51D, for example, had a top speed of 437. So our Mark 14 we have here today is a little faster than the P-51D. As far as range is concerned, of course, the 51 had the long-range tanks. The Spitfire was designed as a short-range airplane initially for defense of the British Isles.
Spectators at warbirds in action often find themselves taken back to their own experiences, many of them in the bombers which attacked the enemy but at great risk to their crews. Like this B-25, this plane took part in a 50th anniversary reenactment of the famous Doolittle raid on Tokyo. The Mitchell, as it was called, was used by both the U.S. and Britain. More than 10,000 were built, but losses kept the inventory to a maximum of about 2,600 during World War II. Also represented at Minter Field, a legendary fighter of the war in the Pacific, the F-4U Corsair. The Sky Boss is flown by Gary Meermans.
Okay, we're talking with Gary Meermans, who's the pilot of the Sky Boss. And Gary, I understand you're an airline pilot professionally, right?
Yes, normally I fly 747s, usually to the Far East, sometimes to London.
But here you're flying a Corsair.
Yeah, this is the fun flying. This is very different flying from what I normally do, so it just makes it extra fun. It's more seat of the pants. It takes different skill level, and it's just that. It's just different.
Gary, tell me about this airplane. First of all, how you came to own it and where it came from.
Mark, I bought it in 1986 out of Casper, Wyoming. It was owned by the Tired Iron Racing Team. They raced it for a little bit. And things changed in their lives, so I was fortunate enough to be able to buy it. The airplane really was born, as it were, right at the end of the war, was flown around Akron, Ohio for its flight test work, then flown to San Diego, and it banged around there for a little bit. And then somehow, we don't know how, but it wound up in Florida in various junkyards. And Don Davis was the fellow that owned Tired Iron. He brought it out and brought it back to life in 1982, and I bought it in 1986.
Tell us something about the Corsair itself and what role it played and what its purpose was.
Well, Corsair was really the mainstay for carrier aircraft. It could carry a bigger load than most of the early jets, so it was used all up through Korea. It had a very long career, much longer than the P-51s, and they were made by 3 different companies, Brewster, Chance-Vought, and Goodyear. This one happens to be a Goodyear, and it's designated as an FG-1D. First airplane to break 400 miles an hour in level flight, so it was way ahead of its time. It has the unique gull shape simply because it had to swing such a big propeller to keep the landing gear a decent length they put on this gull wing, and it also turned out to be an aerodynamic benefit, so it was a terrific airplane in its era.
So it was made by Goodyear.
Yeah, and you're supposed to call yourself by the designation of the manufacturer. When I first bought the airplane, I'd say this is Goodyear 97 Golf Mike, and they'd call me a blimp or something else, so I changed the call sign to Corsair 97 Golf Mike, and everyone knows who I am now.
People think of Goodyears either as blimps or rubber tires, not airplanes.
That's exactly right. So it confused people for a while.
Do you know how they happened to get into the airplane building business?
Well, anybody that could manufacture anything during the war was manufacturing it. So Goodyear had a manufacturing facility, and they just flat out got into the business. And it was a full court press for the war, so Goodyear did their part.
One of the highlights of the Sunday show, the appearance of one of America's top competition aerobatic pilots, Kern County's own Wes Selvage, flying a Pitts Special. There's entertainment for everybody at the Warbirds in Action show, and it seems like there's an airplane for everybody too. These are some of the planes that trained our pilots in World War II. One sure crowd pleaser is the P-51 Mustang.
We're talking with Robert Converse, the owner of the Huntress 3 P-51 Mustang. Robert, first of all, where did you find this plane and how did you manage to acquire it?
Basically, I found the plane about 5 years ago in Detroit, Michigan, and the guys flew it out. We flew it for a couple days out here, and it commenced to come apart, and Tiger rebuilt it. We took a year off, and Tiger took it down and restored the airplane completely to the way it is now.
Now, this is authentic markings, are they not?
That's correct. 353rd Fighter Group.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I got the design as Mangiapane was. That was Bill DeStefano's old P-51. He sold the plane, and the design was really nice. The new owner changed the color scheme, so I went with that, the LH Squadron.
Now, it's also isn't that the same squadron that Tiger's Thunderbolt came out of?
Exactly. The Mustang was the replacement for the P-47.
After 2 days of thrills, it's time for the warbirds to move on to other battlefields. But for thousands of people, Minter Field has been a real treat and a real opportunity to see for themselves the warbirds in action.